You're listening to Joe Dalton on Dublin South FM, Crossing the Rubicon.
I did say a couple of weeks ago I was going to do a show designated to COVID-19 and lockdown. And the reason why, I wanted to give the other side a voice. I wanted to give people information that's not fear-based and very much one-sided. So I have a few guests on today. But first, what I want to do is ask you to listen to this program and then make your own judgment, because it's all about making the right decision. Remember, we live in a democracy and you cannot ignore questions from the citizens. You cannot dismiss them or call them stupid for asking. You cannot tell people to accept an outcome. You cannot force something on people. That's dictatorship. So today, I would like you to listen to Dr. Roger Hodkinson. He's a CEO and a medical director based in Canada. And he made this statement online at a conference.
You're listening to Business Eye on Dublin South FM.
This is Dr. Hodkinson. I do appreciate the opportunity to address you on this very important matter. What I'm going to say is lay language and blunt. It's counter-narrative, and so you don't immediately think I'm a quack. I'm going to briefly outline my credentials so that you can understand where I'm coming from in terms of knowledge base in all of this. I'm a medical specialist in pathology, which includes virology. I trained at Cambridge University in the UK. I'm the ex-president of the pathology section of the Medical Association. I was previously an assistant professor in the Faculty of Medicine doing a lot of teaching. I was the chairman of the Royal College of Physicians of Canada Examination Committee in Pathology in Ottawa. But more to the point, I'm currently the chairman of a biotechnology company in North Carolina selling a COVID-19 test. And you might say I know a little bit about all of this. The bottom line is simply this. There is utterly unfounded public hysteria driven by the media and politicians. It's outrageous. This is the greatest hoax ever perpetrated on an unsuspecting public. There is absolutely nothing that can be done to contain this virus, other than protecting older, more vulnerable people. It should be thought of nothing more than a bad flu season. This is not Ebola. It's not SARS. It's politics playing medicine, and that's a very dangerous game. There is no action of any kind needed other than what happened last year when we felt unwell. We stayed home, we took chicken noodle soup, we didn't visit Granny, and we decided when we would return to work. We didn't need anyone to tell us. Masks are utterly useless. There is no evidence base for their effectiveness whatsoever. Paper masks and fabric masks are simply virtue signaling. They're not even worn effectively most of the time. It's utterly ridiculous seeing these unfortunate, uneducated people, I'm not saying that in a pejorative sense, seeing these people walking around like lemmings, obeying without any knowledge base to put the mask on their face. Social distancing is also useless because COVID is spread by aerosols, which travel 30 meters or so before landing. And closures have had such terrible unintended consequences. Everywhere should be open tomorrow, as was stated in the Great Barrington Declaration that I circulated prior to this meeting. And a word on testing. I do want to emphasize that I'm in the business of testing for COVID. I do want to emphasize that positive test results do not, underlined in neon, mean a clinical infection. It's simply driving public hysteria, and all testing should stop unless you're presenting to hospital with some respiratory problem. All that should be done is to protect the vulnerable and to give them all, in the nursing homes that are under your control, give them all 3,000 to 5,000 international units of vitamin D every day, which has been shown to radically reduce the likelihood of infection. And I would remind you all that using the province's own statistics, the risk of death under 65 in this province is 1 in 300,000. 1 in 300,000. You've got to get a grip on this. The scale of the response that you're undertaking, with no evidence for it, is utterly ridiculous, given the consequences of acting in a way that you're proposing. All kinds of suicides, business closures, funerals, weddings, etc., etc. It's simply outrageous. It's just another bad flu. And you've got to get your minds around that. Let people make their own decisions. You should be totally out of the business of medicine. You're being led down the garden path by the Chief Medical Officer of Health for this province. I'm absolutely outraged that this has reached this level. It should all stop tomorrow. Thank you very much.
You're listening to Business Eye on Dublin South FM.
So yes, folks, my next guest, Ivor Cummings. If you haven't heard of Ivor, I'm surprised. He is singing on the airwaves, talking sense, making people understand the data. As I said in the very beginning of lockdown, that the data never lies. You know, we can make up stories, we can tell what we want to tell, but the data will tell the truth in the very beginning. And all my listeners know that I'm very much against a lockdown because I believe that poverty will cause more damage in this country than lockdown or COVID will ever will. So I asked Ivor to come on the show today to speak the truth, sense, understanding, and what he sees the results of lockdown and where we are going to be in the future. Ivor, how are you, my friend?
Oh, great, Joel. Thanks a lot. Great to be here.
You must be browned off, I tell you. How many interviews are you doing a day, my friend?
Well, I don't care. I always say to people, 2 motivations. I got 5 children. I'm future focused. I've been lecturing on preventative public health, cardiovascular disease, and etc. For the last many, many years. So my motivation is to keep a healthy society and population. And what I've seen the last 7 months ain't going that direction. For the future of the children, for the health of our population, the cost benefit of what's being done is dreadfully negative. So that's the big motivation. And the other one is truth and science. I'm 30 years technically upholding truth, logic, rationality. And what I've seen the last 7 months turns that on its head. So they're my motivations.
It's mad, isn't it? It's like you were in here at the radio station probably about 2-3 years ago talking on nutrition. When did you realize that you smelled a rat? In the beginning of this, when was the figures not adding up for you?
Right. Well, my spidey sense was first triggered, but it was subtle and I wasn't sure what it meant. When in March, people were coming out in the media here and there saying there'll be a new normal and we'll never be going back to the old normal. And I thought, have they not seen the Diamond Princess data and the Chinese data and the risk ratios? This is going to be like a bad flu, a severe flu. It's going to be pretty sad, but it's going to go like any seasonal flu-like illness, and it's going to fade in the summer before it comes back the following winter, on average at a lower level, and then it'll fade out pretty much. So I thought, why are they saying we're never going back to an old normal? It just makes no sense. I understood, of course, a couple of months later what that meant. And really, when the lockdown happened, I understood it because there was fear. You know, the refrigerator trucks in Italy, people seem to ignore that 98.5% of the people who passed, sadly, had multiple comorbidities. The average age was above the life expectancy age. So even though it was a short, sharp shock in Italy, they seemed to just forget about the data completely, didn't have any context. But I understood why the lockdown. And then my problem began when the lockdown was not being taken out rapidly, when the ICUs began to empty exactly as I predicted, and the deaths fell away coming into the spring and summer. It was quite clear there was a love affair with the China-initiated lockdown science, and that began to really worry me. So where is this going?
And that's the question. Where is it going? You know, people are asking me, is the virus still dangerous? Is it still killing as many people as we thought? You know, what are the daily death counts? You know, what is the conclusion? Where are we going? Are we counting flu now with COVID? There's so many questions that people are asking. But it's all about the data. It's like, even if you look at the death tolls between 2018, 2019, 2020, there's not much of a correlation between them all, is there?
Well, not really. So quite a lot of the COVID deaths are people who essentially would have died from something else anyway, or the other driver of their death, the main drivers, were not really COVID. They just had a positive PCR. So what we're seeing now is the expected winter resurgence of an endemic virus. So we had the epidemic in Europe, March, April. We got a huge hit because the prior years were very soft in Europe. So there were a lot of frail, susceptible people kind of built up. And there was a huge hit, and we all saw that. Now, in Ireland, we had at the time around 1,000 passings. I know the numbers were claimed higher, but even Leo Varadkar acknowledged the HICWA reports that it was maybe 850 or 1,000. But the reality is 95% of the people who passed were never given ICU care. And that's not because our guys are bad guys. They were so aged or sick or close to the door, 95%, 19 out of 20 of the people listed, that it wasn't ethical to try and save them, independent of COVID. So people need to understand that for perspective. So if you take away 95% of the deaths as being in that state, even though all lives are precious, you're left with an epidemic peak of less than one person per million people in Ireland per day at the height of the epidemic passed. So again, data, perspective. Now, the epidemic passed, and now we're into endemic winter. And across Europe, particularly countries who did not really experience a first epidemic, seasonally they missed the boat. Now they're seeing quite large increases. And even countries who did experience the epidemic are seeing substantial increases. But again, we've got to look a little closer. So I'll take the UK as an example, try and keep it simple. We see a rise up to 6 or so deaths per million people per day from COVID. So it's rising up. And they're people who died with a positive PCR test, not necessarily driven to their death by COVID-19, okay? And when you look in the last 2 months in England at the excess death overall, it's all occurring so far in the home or in other places, not in hospitals, not in care homes. So we know that for the last 6 or 7 weeks, the rising mortality has been occurring not in a hospital. Therefore, it's not COVID driven broadly. The more lockdown induced deaths. Now, as we go into the winter in the UK, we're going to see more genuine, COVID type deaths. But we have to keep an eye on the all-cause mortality and what's our biggest issue. And that's not being done. So there's overcounting of COVID deaths, a furious overcounting, and there's an ignoring of the fact that most of the excess mortality, which is what you care about, is occurring in the home and in younger ages, i.e. it's not really COVID related. But the issue is that people don't want to talk about the data that tells you what's going on. They just want to talk about COVID. They don't care about the extra cancer deaths coming, the heart attacks from lack of care, the suicide, the depressions, all of that stuff that makes up the vast bulk of mortality in our country now appears not to matter.
It's been ignored. One of the things what sparked me as well, and you see that these advertisements are going around, 2 out of 10 people will suffer from COVID. The other 8 people have been told to go to bed or go home and rest for 2 weeks and take some medication over the counter from your chemist. So that's shown that it's saying that's only about 2% that are getting it. And all this stuff that's going on, I've heard the other day about someone that committed suicide because of lockdown, because their business was gone. Like, it is all being ignored. But these COVID counts, there's been a lot of talk about the PCR test as well. Can you elaborate on that and explain what the concerns are to the general public about that test in itself that is causing this?
The PCR testing is an enormous problem. Because when you've got an endemic virus, You should really be testing people who have symptoms and then identifying, diagnosing, treating. But there's mass testing going on. And if you've got a 0.5% false positive, and it can be up to 1%, you test 1,000 people, you get 10 positives. Many of them may be false positives, or just as bad, people who have viral fragments that are 6 weeks old from an old infection. They'll trigger a positive test. Or people who have such low levels of virus and heading away from it that they get a positive test, but they have no transmissibility to anyone else, and they're not relevant. So only a fraction of the positives, or cases they're calling them, are relevant. So we're not using the fraction that are relevant, but we could lower the cycle count of the test and narrow in on the relevant people and call them cases. But no one's doing that. They want the big number. So it's a huge problem. This is not fit for use as a test in this phase of an endemic virus that's all around our country. It just makes no sense. It can be useful to use PCR in a rising epidemic like in March to try and keep track of what's going on, because you're going to get a lot of positives and many of them, or most of them, are real. But now it's a noise creating test. And the other thing is, with the virus endemic, we have much published science which indicates that there can be dormancy. You know, the WHO 2019 pandemic guidelines said once a virus enters a population substantially, there's no point. They recommend against a test and trace. And like that would be even in an epidemic situation. But now we're post-epidemic, endemic, just meaning it's around the country. We're not in an epidemic, and they're still using test and trace, or trying to, with PCR, which the WHO in 19 recommended against even in an epidemic. And they were correct. By the time you find some kind of signal of where the virus is, you know, it's way over the horizon. It's just not functional. So huge problems with PCR, acknowledged in many published papers. And there's a white paper from an Irish doctors group, and it's at covidrecovery.ie. You can download that paper, covidrecovery.ie. It's readable by the layperson, and there's a big section on PCR in it, as well as the harms of lockdown. So you can, our own best guys, top doctors and surgeons, have even come together to put together the reality on this. And Irish people can go there and download it.
We're living and we're pumping out fear all about COVID, as in the amount of people that have got it. There's so many people that have got this and have survived. I know people in their 70s, you know, who have got it, have gone to bed for a couple of days and have been better. I know of someone that had cystic fibrosis. They had got it and they felt better than ever. Am I banging my head off the wall when I hear, you know, the news saying we found 600 COVID tests today, we found 500 COVID tests today, you know, and even if you look at America, they had a COVID clock on in CNN, and you don't see that anymore now because of the elections. Why are we counting these COVID tests? Why are we not just counting the deaths and learning to live with, okay, a couple of hundred people die on a monthly basis or whatever it is, like flu, like cancer, like all these other diseases. And why can't we just go and live our lives and stop shutting us down, locking us in, treating us like we're imbeciles and institutionalizing us into our own new BS world?
Yeah, well, it's kind of insane, but I see it as cognitive dissonance, enormous groupthink, and kind of psychosis. So the politicians, led by worldwide bodies, drove remorselessly these lockdown ideologies. We know now from the published science, there's almost 20 published papers. People mightn't realize this, including one in the Lancet from June. And all these papers say the same thing. What we expected, actually, is that lockdown and lockdown stringency doesn't correlate or link to deaths per million across all the countries. And funny enough, Joe, today, November 19th, our 20th paper got published, I think the Journal of Public Health or whatever, and they say that the exact same thing from their analysis, lockdown and stringency of implementations had no correlation or linkage to deaths per million across all the countries. What did correlate is metabolic health levels in the country linked to the deaths per million from COVID. And economic vectors did, and also UV index, not too surprising to me. And the fall in the rate of longevity, which is just metabolic health of a country, as in the falling rate of longevity.
Yeah.
So basically, all the factors which would have had an enormous effect if the governments had focused on them back in March in reducing the impact, enormous beneficial effects, have been ignored. All of the collateral damage of lockdowns and all the death, suicides, heart attacks, everything has been ignored. And what have they remorselessly driven? Lockdown ideology, which we know from the published science doesn't really work. So yes, it is an insane world. And we do have a situation like the Dutch tulip thing back in the 1600s, the Salem witch trials. You know, everyone has kind of gone a bit crazy and ignored the science.
There's more papers coming out. There's more doctors speaking out. We even know that there's doctors who are speaking to either you or have spoken to me, but they're not willing to speak out because they're fearful of their job. But I think those numbers are growing and growing and growing. And like someone say, look, you publish a paper on something, you can debunk a debunk. You know, that's basically what they're saying. But what's frustrating from the layperson that are tuned in, who are listening to the government, these are elected officials that work for us. And they're not even answering the questions from the people, the citizens, questions that people want to know. Like, why are these officials standing up, sprouting out some garbage, but won't take questions and won't give answers to what people are trying to find out? I'm getting frustrated because I'm annoyed.
Yeah. Oh, no, understandably. And they can't really answer because they're kind of clueless, to be honest. So it appears that NPHET, I guess, is the de facto government of this country. I mean, that's the way it's been. That's not even criticizing NPHET, actually. That's just stating an apparent fact. The government are politicians. They're possibly the most technically inept people in the universe, because people who have talents to go into politics, it's a different talent set completely than technical. So it's just a natural selection. So they're saying, okay, the guys up top, who are the sciencey guys, the bureaucrats, are saying we got to do this. So we better do it, because if we don't do it and something bad happens, we'll be blamed. If we do it and something bad happens, they'll be blamed. And if something bad doesn't happen, we can claim credit for doing the stuff that they said. So every single logic path is for a politician is to just follow NPHET. So NPHET have been handed the keys to the country completely, because what they say dictates the economy, dictates the extra cancer deaths, dictates the extra suicides, dictates the extra heart attacks, dictates the destruction of the future for our young and the next generation, dictates the destruction of our freedoms that we fought for. And basically, that means they are the dictators of Ireland. It's because they dictate everything, really, everything of importance in society. They own it. They own it.
You know, I always believe everything revolves around a belief system. And we are only affected what happens within our own immediate group. And as someone said, we are all in this together. We're not all in it together, because some people are on cruise liners and some people are on rafts, or, you know, some people are hanging on to bits of wood. And I believe that Tony and his henchmen are up in a cruiser, and they're not seeing reality as what it is. And that's what is very scary to myself and people that speak to me on a daily basis. One of the things that I notice as well, a lot of business owners will talk to me, but they won't say anything publicly either, because they're frightened that they lose their grants.
They can't speak. And I mean, if you were a minority during the Salem witch trials and you spoke up and said, hold on a minute, I don't think these women are witches, and here's the data, what's going to happen to you? Go figure. And that's the way it is. So we've had 2 or 3 medics now and a surgeon have essentially lost their jobs just by speaking up. And that's a chilling effect. And that warns the others. So again, luckily, there appears to be a group, COVID, or I just got to get this right, covidrecovery.ie is actually an all doctors group. And there's over 20 of them that have written their signatures on the white paper I mentioned. So they are standing up with strength in numbers. Now, I can tell you, I've gone through the white paper and it's excellent. And no one is criticizing the white paper. So that's interesting. Claire Byrne interviewed Professor Jack Lambert the other morning, and she wasn't as aggressive as normal. And she referred to the white paper, but she couldn't find anything to criticize in it. Nothing at all. And I think it may have even changed her tone a little, having just read it. So these guys have the science on their side. No question about that. The 45,000 doctors and scientists, 45,000 who signed the Great Barrington Declaration at gbdeclaration.org, they're correct. And all over the world, there are groups of doctors and scientists, Germany and Belgium and all over the world, Canada, are all coming out with strength in numbers and safety in numbers. The problem is they are up against the majority groupthink psychosis. So it's still very difficult. But it's great to see some traction happening now. And I think they're being driven to it by the sheer enormity of the bad decisions being made are now getting way out of hand. And the collateral damage, go to collateralglobal.org. And the scientists and doctors there have put together 80 published papers on the destructions to population health, societal, mental, and physical. And they've collected them together. So people who have ethics, honor, decency, and respect for science and feel for overall public health are coming out. And the cabals that are driving remorseless lockdowns and basically burning up the country with no benefit. We know it's published now. The lockdowns give you very little.
Yeah.
Those people are going to be under pressure, more pressure.
Donnelly came out on the radio the other day and said, we're not doing enough. Like, basically blaming people. And as someone said to me, I can't do anymore. I'm in my house. I'm locked down. I can't do anything. What do they want us to do? And I said, they want you to live in the basement like Joe Biden. He's blaming the citizens of Ireland. That's what he was basically saying. And it's annoying. It's frustrating. But look, everybody is talking about this. If anybody wants to find any information or any of the data, go to your website or find you online. But the question I need to ask you is, we all know this and more people are getting to realize this. But what is the solution? What is the solution? I think we need to now, we've thrown all the data out there. What do we do? What is the solution? What do we need to do as forget about the EU, forget about, the rest of the world, as the citizens of Ireland, what do we need to do to change this? Do we need to kind of go, lockdown isn't working. We need to, let people out. We need to question our government more. We need them to answer these questions. What do we do?
Yeah, okay. I'd say the technical solution is actually not that difficult from the science. So we could return to the 2019 Ireland pandemic guidelines, which do not have lockdown. They have stay at home with symptoms. They have hygiene. They have a bit of distancing. And they're the same as the WHO 2019 October guidelines. 100 pages, clear as day. Test and trace doesn't add value, and we should not quarantine exposed individuals, never mind whole countries. So you can return to the proper guidelines before China came and hypnotized us. And you can go to covidrecovery.ie, download the white paper, print it out, mail it to your politicians, business leaders, send it by email, find email lists. And if all the people sent that white paper, which is excellent, and I've heard it's being delivered, printed, published to all the TDs, possibly today, keep sending that paper, because anyone who reads that paper can no longer turn around and stand up erect and promote lockdowns that they are doing. So I'd say there's some things you can do, but essentially there are 2 published papers now with analyses advanced, and they indicate that if you lock down because your hospitals are overwhelmed and you do actually flatten the curve, if you actually achieve that, which is hard, and you should only do it if you're desperately overwhelmed, which we're not. But if you achieve that, it shows that over the long term, you will get more total COVID-19 deaths. And it's complex, but it's essentially because the elderly, who are the ones mostly affected, have low mobility. The young and the working age who are not affected have high mobility. And the worst thing you can do is reduce the mobility of the young and healthy and middle-aged working people, because then the elderly and the people who will not be affected are brought to similar mobility. In other words, you've made it worse, and you are preventing community immunity, and you need community immunity to help save Granny in the winter. But they squandered that chance. They squandered it. So now Granny and Grandpa are at risk in the winter, elevated risk, because of what they've done, right? Not to mention all the extra deaths. And I will finish on one point, suicides. I personally am connected to 3 people now whose spouses committed suicide directly as a result of lockdown. One was on Niall Boylan the other day. We have 2 more. And those people each know multiple other ones they've heard, lockdown related. Now, I want people to think of one thing. If you've got 1,000 passings in Ireland, even though our all-cause mortality for the first 6 months of the year is no different than prior years, but 1,000 who did die with SARS-CoV-2, on average, there's an average of a few months life years for each one. But let's say you get 300 life years lost, the remaining years, 300. You only need, right, around 10 suicides to beat the suffering and death and life years lost of all of those people. 10 suicides. We've got those and much more already. So just suicides could lose more life years due to lockdown than all the people who died from COVID-19. Now add heart attacks and add the future cancers, it's going to blow away the COVID-19 deaths.
It's also just the mental stress that it's causing people. Yeah. That mental stress can be triggered, can take years and years to overcome. It gets shocking. What's your thoughts on the vaccine?
I generally stay out of the conversations, but one way I can allow myself to enter them, because if anyone even wonders what the name of the vaccine is nowadays, you get called an anti-vaxxer. So that's gone completely out of control. But I will say one thing, engineering. I'm a biochemical engineer, a complex problem solving leadership for years, logic, everything. And I say, go back to the math. So it's quite clear if you do the math on the coronavirus vaccine, that comes not only after the epidemic in most countries in Europe, but will come after the endemic seasonal surge. So it'll come when the thing has mostly done what it can do already. So that's one problem. But if you look at that and you look at the average age of those who died, in the UK, there's a guideline for decades, 20,000 sterling max per quality adjusted life year saved for a medication. A quick look at the figures would suggest that this vaccine, if widely deployed, would be 10 times or much more expensive than the upper limit guidelines in the UK, the NICE organization. So I'd say you can talk all you want about potential harms and the fact that it's a rushed cycle. And all that's valid. I mean, a rushed drug is never a good idea. But the cost benefit breaches all guidelines, because you're going to be applying it to so many people and saving such a relatively small fraction of very aged passings. So it would never be approved as a kind of medication. But it seems because everyone's so gone over the top on this, it's still perceived as a good thing, even though the mathematics makes no sense. So again, we're back to the data. We're back to the data.
And a lot of people say they won't be queuing up right away to get that. They'll be waiting 18 months. So you kind of wonder that. Final last question. Why do you think RTE are pushing the fear narrative and not asking the hard questions?
Yeah, well, I haven't watched RTE in a long time, really, for a similar reason, though this year it went into hyperdrive. I think they're just a government mouthpiece. So I joke about them being Ireland Pravda. So just like Pravda in the Soviet Union simply repeated what the Politburo wanted, I just think it's pretty similar. And then the Irish Broadcasting Authority has been pouring money to all the radio and TV stations to put on ads every 15 minutes saying we're all going to die. That's gone on for 6 months. I don't know how people even leave the radio on anymore. So funding, and clearly massively biased to support whatever the government or NPHET say and attack anything that says otherwise, is where they are. And you could ask individuals in there why, but I don't think they know. It's like the Borg. It's like hive activity. It's groupthink. It's cognitive dissonance. Parroting.
I question why, like the Late Late Show, which was, an entertainment program, is now become a political tool for the government to scare fear into people. It's something that's meant to be about laughter and joy and entertainment, and it's gone beyond that. It is shocking on it.
Yeah, it's kind of the Pravda light Late Late Show. I mean, it's clear to anyone with a scientific brain, the stuff they've had people on there coming out with utter nonsense. Like, they've had professors coming out saying 80,000 would die in Ireland. Then they dropped it to 30,000. And like those figures were complete nonsense. And Neil Ferguson's modeling that suggested that was debunked before it even got off the presses, by Professor Levitt and others, and proven right. He was out by a factor of 12. We knew that from Diamond Princess data back in February. I mean, this is elementary stuff. But the Late Late rolled them out and they nod and smile and nod. It's a joke. It's a farce.
Ego and power. That's what a lot of it is, I believe, is behind it. It's very hard to let go of something once you have it, and control, especially in government circles on it. How's your own life been? Have you been vilified? Has your life changed in any way? Because I salute you as being a hero of 2020, because you're probably one of the most outspoken people in the country on COVID. Has it affected you in any way personally?
Well, it's made me very angry. That's one thing. I fight on behalf of my children and everyone's children, and truth in science. That's the fact of the matter. Straighten the lens. Anyone who wants to debate this issue scientifically, technically, or ethically, well, I'm calling you out now. I'll debate it, and I won't lose. So no one will want to debate me. But no, I have a steely resolve, because I have a long corporate history, and I've been many years fighting the kind of pharmaceutical industrial complex and the food industry that's destroying modern kind of population health. So I'm used to being aggressive out there, and that set me up well. But this one is about the children and the next generation and our population health in a more profound way than even the bad food causing disease is. So it doesn't really affect me at all. I think FDR said once, I welcome their hatred. FDR in the Depression, he said, I am hated by my class. And he meant the upper class. He decided to side with the citizens to fix the problem. And that's what he said, I welcome their hatred. And I welcome the hatred of these people, because these people, whether knowingly or unknowingly, are driving this thing. It's quite despicable. And we talked on the impacts to our society and societal health, physical, mental, everything. that's being caused by this absurd, unscientific ideology of lockdown. And I welcome their hatred.
And may you get it as a badge of honor, because the hardest thing is always the right thing to do. And when people are shouting at you, you're doing something right. You're doing something right. Information. If someone who is listening to the show and they want to sort of search for more information, where can they go?
Yeah, I'd say just search engine Ivor Cummings, and you'll hit the YouTube where a lot of the stuff is, and you'll see interviews with professors, doctors, professionals all over the world, and a lot of my own as well, where I go to the data in a way a layperson can understand. I'm not being kind of arrogant there, but you know what I mean. And I'd say currently I'm fascinated by covidrecovery.ie, so I'd certainly direct people to that. Download that white paper. It's got 51 scientific references, but it's readable. And download it and send it to your politician, send it to your, leaders, influencers, and get the truth in science out there before we ruin everything for nothing.
Ivor, you're a blessing. You're, and a lot of people are thanking you. The silent majority out there, they are really proud of what you're doing. So keep up that fight, and more people will awaken each and every day because of what you're doing. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Joe, and you too. Thank you.
Take care.
You're listening to Business Eye on Dublin South FM.
Well, there you have it, folks. Ivor Cummings, a man with tons of information, and he's got lots of YouTube videos, lots of interviews with people around the world who are asking questions, who want to find out the answers, and they keep trying to put these questions to the government. Nobody's listening. Nobody will answer. My next guest is Lorie Ladd, and Lorie shares her thoughts with you on a relationship with the media. And after Lorie, we're going to finish on a poem, If, by Kipling.
Hello everyone, happy Friday, I love you. I'm sending you a very big virtual hug wherever you are on the earth plane in this now moment. So today's video is about what we in the United States call the mainstream media. So there are 5 or 6 main media outlets where most of us have been programmed to get our information. The intention of this is to shine light on a collective consciousness, mainstream media. This doesn't have to be your truth. You don't have to resonate with this. In fact, it may trigger you or anger you. I encourage you, if you don't like this message, if it triggers you, if it angers you, if it upsets you, observe that. And instead of projecting how you are feeling back out onto me or somebody else, perhaps just choose to respond from a higher state of consciousness. Choose to respond maybe with some empathy, compassion, or love. Because we all have different truths. And why are we not allowed to stand on the battlefield with different truths? That the mainstream media vibrates at is fear, manipulation, control, and greed. No right or wrong, no good or bad. It's just the consciousness that feeds the mainstream media as a collective, okay? And so what we're seeing right now is that collective starting to get louder and louder and louder so that we can see it and choose to step out of it. This isn't political. This isn't good, bad, right, or wrong. This is how we shift a human collective. It's that simple. And what is currently happening is we are watching the mainstream media get more fear-based, more controlling, more manipulative, right? And more greed. Because that has to come up so that we can see it and see it and see it and see it. And I liken the mainstream media's relationship to us to a abusive relationship. And the reason I use this analogy is because when we are in relation with the mainstream media, it can feel very much like an abusive relationship. And I'll explain this to you. In the beginning, When you're in a relationship with somebody, it's you love them, you're having fun, they love you back, you feel safe, you feel seen, right? It's beautiful. When we step into the relationship with the mainstream media at whatever age it is, right? We feel like we're being protected, we're given information, we feel safe, we feel like we're being taken care of, right? And then what slowly starts to happen is this thing that we call gaslighting and manipulation, where our partner will start to physically abuse us or emotionally or mentally abuse us, very slowly though, right? So that we are groomed into being in an abusive relationship. So maybe we get pushed against a wall or slapped across the face, right? And the partner's like, it's no big deal. I'm really sorry. I love you so much. It'll never happen again. I never meant to hurt you. Don't feel bad. Don't feel sad. It's not that big of a deal. Buckle, don't be so emotional. It's no big deal, right? The mainstream media is very similar, right? They will tell you things that are going to create fear and anxiety, but then they will tell you not to worry about it, that we've got your best interest at hand, that no, there's nothing to be afraid of. Don't worry if you lose your business. It's okay. We're going to take care of you. But inside you're like, yeah, something doesn't feel right. When my partner hits me, something doesn't feel right, right? When the media is telling me that my rights are being taken away, something doesn't feel right, but they're telling me not to trust that. They're telling me not to trust my internal knowingness, right? And so because the beginning of the relationship was good and it felt safe, you believe them. You believe them. So we slowly start to see this happen in the mainstream media, if you're awake to it. And then we start to kind of make excuses. Well, they are the mainstream media and they are taking care of us and they want what's best for us. This is my partner. He does love me. He wants what's best for me, right? We believe that deeply because we want to see the best in humans. Then what happens is people come into your life and say, that's not okay. That hitting or saying those mean things to you, that's not okay. And then what does your partner do? He separates you. He alienates you. He divides you by doing what? He tells you that they're not good for you, that they're trying to manipulate you, that they're lying to you, that they're trying to make you unhappy, that they're going to ruin your life. What does the mainstream media do when people come in and say, hey, you know what? That mainstream media information might not be the only truth. It might not be true. What the mainstream media does is they divide you. They're conspiracy theorists. They are evil. They're angry. They're volatile. Be afraid of them. They're trying to separate you from the truth that we're giving you, right? They create a massive divide. We see that right now. We're seeing that, right? There's massive amounts of censorship, right? If you are trying to tell people, hey, that might not be the only truth, the mainstream media is going to try to censor that information. So they're going to try to create a divide. It's just what a partner does in an abusive relationship. So then what happens is you have cognitive dissonance, which is, wait a second. I'm seeing this stuff happening. I'm hearing these people tell me different information about the mainstream media, and yet I can't fathom that the mainstream media would lie to me. It just doesn't make any sense. I can't hold that truth. And so you choose to stay with the mainstream media. It's the same with the relationship. I know this person loves me. I know they love me. I can't fathom that they would be doing all this abusive stuff to me, even though they're doing this abusive stuff to me. And I'm afraid to leave. Where else would I go? Same with the mainstream media. Where else is there to go? Where else can I get my information? Because we have been programmed by the mainstream media to believe that they are the only place for information. We are programmed by our partners to believe that they are the only ones that will love us. That if we leave, we will be alone. We will be afraid. No one's going to love us, right? It's the same thing. If you start to look at it, it's the same thing. Now, there is no right or wrong, good or bad about this. This is consciousness, right? This is how a consciousness gets dismantled. So here's what I want to ask you. Just sit with this for a second and just ask yourself these questions. 1, is there one narrative in this now moment that all the mainstream media is giving us? Or are there multiple narratives? For instance, with COVID, are all the mainstream media outlets telling us the same thing? Or are they providing us with multiple theories, multiple stories, multiple narratives? Why is there only one narrative? Because you and I know There's multiple truths. And don't we have the right to see different truths? That's the first question. Second question, is the mainstream media objective or subjective? Is there an agenda? Or is it objective? And are there multiple opinions being given to us? Question number 3, why are people being censored? Why are people crazy or violent or whatever it is if you are not following along with their narrative? Because it is happening. Thousands of people are being censored every day if you are not in the mainstream media's narratives. I'm just asking a question. These are just questions. Question number 4, how does it feel when you are listening to the media? Close your eyes and just listen to the media, the mainstream media. How does it feel? Does it feel expansive, free, loving, peaceful, empowered? Or does it feel restricted, fearful, anxiety, worry, preparation for what may come, disempowered? How do you feel when you listen to it? And be really honest with yourself. In the mainstream media that is holding us in lower states of consciousness, fear, manipulation, disempowerment, no choice, anxiety and stress, etc., etc. These have to be seen. This is an opportunity to begin to choose whether you want to stay in it or whether you want to shift into higher states. If the mainstream media is providing us with the opportunity to experience fear, lack of choice, disempowerment, anxiety, control, isn't that showing us what is no longer serving us and what is in a lower state of consciousness? In order for us to choose to no longer be in it and step out of it so that we can dismantle it, the way you dismantle it is you step out of it. You step out of the mainstream media's outlets.
You're listening to Business Eye on Dublin South FM.
If, by Rudyard Kipling. If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too, if you can wait and not be tired by waiting, or being lied about, don't deal in lies, or being hated, don't give way to hating, and yet don't look too good, nor talk too wise. If you can dream and not make dreams your master, if you can think and not make thoughts your aim, if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two impostors just the same, if you can bear to hear the truth you've spoken, twisted by knaves to make a trap for fools, or watch the things you gave your life to broken, and stoop and build them up with worn-out tools, if you can make one heap of all your winnings and risk it on one turn of pitch and toss, and lose and start again at your beginnings, and never breathe a word about your loss, if you can force your heart and nerve and sinew to serve your turn long after they are gone, and so hold on when there is nothing in you except the will which says to them, hold on. If you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings nor lose the common touch, if neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, if all men count with you, but are none too much, if you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that's in it. And, which is more, you'll be a man, my son.
This is Dublin South FM.